Hey, SA3X learners. You already know me. I'm Alexis Bateman. I'm the course lead for SE3X Supply Chain Dynamics. Want to welcome you to our third live event. We have a special guest, Dr. Bruce Arntzen, and I'll introduce him in just a minute. I'm going to give a few minor course updates, and then we'll jump right into our cool session that we have planned today. Also, apologies for the late start. We had some technical problems, and we'll just make sure we make the best use of our time for the remaining 53 minutes that we have. So first, as you guys know, we just opened up week 9, Risk and Resilience with Professor Yossi Sheffi. So make sure to watch the videos, try out the practice problems and the graded assignment. And then next Wednesday, we'll be opening week 10, Exogenous Factors, that has Dr. Chris Kaplis and myself, and we're talking about exogenous factors, inclusive of many other things that are impacting the supply chains that complement what you've already learned in global supply chains and risk and resilience in the last 3 weeks. And there will be the fourth and final open response assessment problem, exogenous factors, that's already open. So if you want to take a look at the prompt and see what that looks like, you'll need to answer that based on the course content from the exogenous factors module. So just to be aware of those upcoming things. And now to get to the more exciting part of our session, we're lucky, and you guys, a familiar face or a familiar voice at least, Dr. Bruce Arntzen. We're thankful to have him join us today. Bruce, before he came, Bruce has been at MIT CTL for the last decade as the executive director of the supply chain management program, and before that he had 20 plus years in industry in supply chain. So he brings a wealth of experience in industry, and then also now at MIT as a researcher and as an academic program executive director. So, and as you saw, he put together the lessons for global supply chains for those 2 weeks. And then also we had that new lesson, the lesson 3, global supply chain applications, which was a cool new case study that I know many of you guys enjoyed. So recently he finished a research project on recession-ready supply chains. And so I thought it would be great to have him today to talk about what he learned in his research and some of the findings and how he went about it, and also give you guys the opportunity to ask him some questions that you've had as you've gone through his lessons. Welcome, Bruce. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Alexis, and welcome to all the SC3X learners out there.
Great. So I think we'll jump right into the content. So since we are running a little late on time, make sure that we can get through and get to be able to talk about your cool study. So Bruce and a postdoctoral researcher, Nima at the center, just completed a research study on recession-ready supply chains. And following this live event, we'll make available their pieces that they published some of their findings in Supply Chain Management Review. But today we'll just talk through some of the things that they learned along the way. So first we're going to go 20 minutes with me asking Bruce some questions, and then and also we'll be putting in some polls, so make sure to answer the polls once I start releasing those polls, and then we'll give you the last 20 minutes, whatever we have left, and you'll have an opportunity to ask him a question. So Bruce, why do you think it's important for companies to think about being ready for a recession?
Excellent question, Alexis. While we're speaking, the stock market will probably crash now that we're on the air here, but let me set the stage just a little bit about this. So imagine that you have your own company, you have your factory, and you've got some cash in the bank. So you got a factory, you got some cash in the bank. You've got your suppliers, and of course you bring material from your suppliers, and then you send money to them, right? And then over here you have your customers, and hopefully you're sending product to your customers, and they're sending money back to you. So this is a nice little flow of product from supplier to you, to your customers, and the money is coming from your customers to you, back to your suppliers. But of course, there's more to the story than that, because you've got employees, and of course, you're sending money to your employees. You're buying all sorts of things like paper and pencils and copiers and computers, and so you're sending money out the door to pay for that kind of stuff. And then you have some of these fixed costs. You've got the lease on the building, you've got insurance, you've got the utilities and so forth, right? So this is all, as long as this flow continues, everybody's happy, everything's working nicely. But as soon as the stock market crashes, that's like a bell. Somebody rings a bell, and everybody sort of, uh-oh, it's going to crash, right? And the first thing that happens when the bell rings is your customers, they try to stop bringing product in from you. They try to cancel those orders, downsize those. We're going to buy down. They want to stop the flow of product because they want to stop the flow of money out of their bank to you. So they're trying to cut off your money supply, and you just keep your products. Thank you very much, right? Because in a recession, cash is king. You heard it here for the first time, I'm sure. But the idea is you have to get to the other side of the recession and still have some cash. If you run out of cash before you get to the other side of the recession, the game is over. And so you don't want the game to be over. And what you'll find out, what we'll talk about a little bit here, is different types of practices that make it difficult for you to control that situation. So if the bell rings, you better be ready for a recession, Alexis.
Right. Sounds right. Great. So, and then I just released a poll now for those of you guys online. Now that we've kind of seen from Bruce what it looks like, why it's important to be ready for a recession. Just to pop in the poll, has a recession ever impacted your work in the supply chain? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. And we'll get back to those results in just a minute. So, okay, so let's jump on to our next question. So, what does it mean for a company to be recession ready? What does that look like?
Well, in the study that we did, we tried to look at what happens in a supply chain. Thank you on this slide. That causes you not to be ready for a recession. And it turns out that when times are good times, and we've had good times for the last 10 years, when times are good, there's a lot of pressure on supply chain people to relax the rules and to do things a little bit sloppy. So, for example, one example is, are you having contracts for your orders? Or are you just relying on a handshake? A lot of, the salespeople out there sometimes get a little bit sloppy, and they don't have written contracts that are set in stone. The other thing that happens during a recession is you'll be under pressure from the sales organization to relax the sales terms. So instead of having everybody pay in 30 days, come on, they can pay in 45 days or 60 days. I'll make more sales. The customers are asking for a little bit longer to pay the bill. And during very good times, that's not so bad. It doesn't hurt you so much to relax your payment terms. But of course, during a recession, that's a killer to your company because the lack of cash coming in. The other thing that happens is what I would call relaxed collections. You can imagine the sales force saying, "Don't keep pestering this customer to pay their bill. We're on the verge of this another big sale. We've been working on this sale for a long time. So don't confuse the customer by trying to demand payment for the last thing we sold them," right? So those relaxed collections during good times, not so bad, but they will come back and be very damaging to your company in a recession, because that's when you're going to need cash, and you won't be able to collect because you've set a precedent of being lackadaisical about collections. The engineers, if you have a product that is engineered, engineers love to use interesting new high-tech materials, cutting-edge materials in their product designs. Unfortunately, if you're not using industry standard materials, and when the bell rings, you cannot cancel your order of customized materials. And so you have to continue to take delivery of those materials that you can no longer use, and you have to pay for those materials that you can no longer use. So customized raw materials is a bad thing, and you need to keep it under control during good times. The other thing that happens is if everything's going great, people tend to assume that their suppliers are very healthy. They're doing well. You You haven't been good at bringing up the idea of, can I see your financial statements to make sure your suppliers are healthy? And of course, when the bell rings and a recession hits, a weak supplier is going to go out of business, and then you won't be able to get the product that you need. Even if you wanted to bring in product to sell it, you wouldn't be able to. A popular thing that happens during good times, and I've seen it happen a lot, is a bloated workforce. It's fun and easy to hire more people. It's very, very hard to get rid of people. And so during good times, workforces tend to swell, they get bigger. That comes back to haunt you. Also, people try to expand their little kingdom. Let's buy more facilities, buy an extra warehouse. Country managers around the world want to invest in infrastructure in their own country, and that seems to be okay during good times. It's hard to tell them, no, you can't do that. And my final example of bad practices during good times is what I would call uncontrolled purchasing, and I see that even around me here. Lots of different people are buying things. Lots of people have purchasing cards. They have the ability to buy materials and buy things. And when the recession hits, everybody has the opinion as well. Yeah, I know there's a recession, but I just need to buy these extra few little things. These few little things aren't going to bring the company down. Well, if you multiply that across everybody in the company, of course, it brings the company down. So there's a whole list of practices that we get used to during good times that turn out to be very damaging to us during the bad times.
Thanks, Bruce. Just as we're having a technical glitch, Arthur, they can't see the video in Slido.
Yep. Let me go.
Okay.
Let me go there.
Sorry for the.
I don't know what happened today. It's just not. Give me 1 second.
Just want to make sure that everyone can see. The good thing is that it's being recorded, so they'll be able to watch the first half later.
Yeah, really
all right.
Sorry about that.
Now, if I switch to this slide, you can see how those bad practices I just talked about relate to each of the flows. For each of the flows, there's a corresponding bad practice that you have to guard against during good times.
Great. Thanks for your patience. It should show in just 1 second.
Okay. Okay,
so it should be showing there if they refresh.
Okay, all right, great. For those of you guys that were just able to join us, very sorry for the technical issue. It was not showing on the Slido account. Now it should be, you should be able to see it. So apologies for that. So we are here, and just as a refresher, we're here with Dr. Bruce Arntzen. We got the session started, and unfortunately the recording wasn't showing. And you guys are familiar with him from week 7 and 8, global supply chains, and we're talking now about recession-ready supply chains. So he just introduced a little bit of the beginning of what it means to be recession-ready, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about his research. So just as you guys see on the poll, if you see a poll, whether if you think that a recession has impacted your work in the supply chain, it shows that 38% said yes, 15% no, and 46% said I'm not sure. So I'm guessing that some, by the end, you'll know whether it's been impacted or not, and how to be ready for that. All right, so Bruce, let's continue on with our questions, and everyone can jump in now. And you guys feel free to start putting in questions as you are listening with Bruce. Those are the ones that we're going to ask him at the end of the session, and I'll put them through. And if they if you like a certain question, you can upvote it, and those are the ones that will be most likely to get asked. All right, Bruce, how did you examine whether supply chains are recession ready?
Well, what we did was we looked at 100 manufacturing companies. We chose small to medium companies that would focus mainly on manufacturing. Very, very large companies have ancillary businesses hanging off the side, so we didn't want gigantic companies. But the question we were asking is, we've had 10 years of a beautiful recovery from the last recession, and us human beings are great at looking backwards to see what's going on, right? But is anybody looking ahead to say, are we just about to enter another recession? So we tried to ask the question, are the companies today any better prepared for the next recession, which might be pretty soon, right, than they were just before the last recession. So we compare that just before the last recession to just before this recession and say, what condition were you in back then? And what condition are you in right now? And did we learn anything? So we decided to compare several years. So we decided to compare. So 2007 was the year just before the last recession, and 2009 was the bottom of the last recession. So we compared 2007 and 2009, first of all, just to see how bad it was. How bad did companies suffer, right? And then we compared 2018 to 2007. So 2018 is presumably just before the next recession, although I'd love it to go on forever, the good times, but I have a hunch that it's not going to go on forever, okay? And so we tried to see, are there any better prepared now in 2018 than they were in 2007 to go into a recession? So what we did was we tried to find, now if you work inside of a manufacturing company, all those practices of relaxing terms and so forth, all of those you could get information on if you were inside of a manufacturing company. However, if you're not inside the company, they're not going to tell you the answers to all those questions. So you have to rely on publicly available data. So we got the financial statements and we tried to pick out metrics that we thought related back to those flows in that little supply chain that we showed you. So we tried to find metrics that we thought would be good predictors of recession readiness or not, based on supply chain specific types of metrics. So revenues, usually the higher revenue, the better you are. Profitability, the higher, the better you are. How leveraged? When we say how leveraged, what we mean is the ratio of total liabilities divided by total assets, right? And you want lower is better. You want lower liabilities compared to your assets. Working capital, we started off looking at working capital, but that's kind of a strange metric because during a recession, some of your assets are not so liquid anymore. So you cannot move inventory very easily. Nobody wants to buy the stuff, right? And your accounts receivable, they don't want to pay you either. And so what normally would be thought of as assets, orders and accounts receivable and inventory as assets, not such good things in a recession. They don't help you very much. They might actually hurt you. We looked at a variable cost structure. The more variable your cost structure is, the better you are, the more flexible you are to respond to a recession. We looked at revenue per employee. That's a great metric. The higher revenue is better. We looked at days sales outstanding in terms of accounts receivable, and the lower is the better, because days sales outstanding is essentially a loan that you've taken out from your suppliers.
Okay.
And so the lower, the better. And finally, the number of employees. Like I said in the last slide, that people love to hire employees and inflate their workforce. And of course, that's very hard to counteract when there's a recession. It's easy to get employees, very hard to get rid of employees gracefully. And so lower is better. So those are the metrics that we looked at. And then what we did was we had two types of analysis. One analysis was looking horizontally across all 100 companies. So we would take one metric at a time, for example, revenues, and we'd say, let's look all across all 100 companies. What's the average? Did the average go down from 2007 to 2009? Did it go back up? What happened to each of these metrics overall? And then we looked vertically. We took one company at a time, and we would look at we had about 8 or 10 metrics. We would look at all these metrics for one company at a time and try to pass a judgment that says, was this company better off in 2007? How bad was it in 2009? And actually, some companies were better off in 2009. That really surprised us. The image is that everybody gets worse during a recession, but there was a significant fraction of the companies that actually doing better in the recession than they were doing before the recession. That was interesting. And then we would compare it to 2018 to see. So those are the two types of analysis that we did.
Right. Okay, great. So that was very interesting. I think everyone is now on our session and is able to hear about this. So, so I just to go back to the polls, we also have a poll that I'm going to release right now. If you guys can answered. So we had a good feedback on whether you think he was been impacted by the recession. Do you think, now that you've heard a little bit about Bruce talking about, do you think your company is recession ready? Now that you've heard a little bit about what it might mean to, obviously it's a difficult thing to assess, but whether you feel that your company is recession ready. So now let's think about, so you introduced a little bit how you went about the research. And so what were the most interesting results from the study? What did you find between those companies, obviously the horizontal and vertical kind of integration over time, or excuse me, not vertical assessment over time between a single company? What came out as interesting to you?
Well, first I'll talk about what we found when we looked horizontally across the metrics for all the companies. And so you have a little chart, if you can see that. Is it up there? So if you looked at revenues, for example, you can see that the revenues dipped as everybody expected. From 2007, they got worse in 2009. And by the way, we modified all of the numbers to be back in 2007 constant dollars. So everything all the analyses were done in 2007 dollars.
Okay.
And then the revenues have recovered back, and you can see the result is that 2018, in terms of just revenues, is actually a little stronger than it was in 2007.
Okay.
However, the profitability has gone down. It was 6.8% average profitability. Now it's down to 5.8% in 2018. So it got a little bit weaker there. And then in terms of how leveraged companies were, what was their debt compared to their assets? Again, the ratio got a little bit worse. It went from 0.43 up to 0.49, and that's, if it gets bigger, it's bad. So they were slightly weaker. Working capital looks like it improved a lot, but again, like I said, we don't trust that metric, so we didn't put much stock into it because during a recession, you can't move your inventory. The variable cost structure got a lot weaker. So companies have a lot less flexibility now than they had in 2007, which is a bad thing. The revenue per employee, this is very expected. You have 10 years of beautiful recovery and growth. You're going to hire a lot of people.
Sure.
And so the revenue per employee went down, which is bad. The accounts receivable is not much different. 58 days went up to 60 or 61 days. So the companies are slightly weaker in that regard. And the number of employees, again, like I said, it got a lot larger than average. So if you look just at the colors, you see one green, which is good. You see three yellows, which are slightly worse, and you see three reds, which are much worse. So I think it's pretty obvious that companies, just their averages across everything, are in a weaker position than they were in 2007.
Right, and so that tells us that when something happens down the road, these supply chains are not ready and will be impacted pretty significantly. Is there, okay, great. Now this is, so then we also have our poll going. Let's see what, so it seems, clearly, obviously, looking at your slide, I'm guessing maybe the results were a little skewed by that, but students said, do you think your company is recession ready? Only 10% said yes. 40% said no. And then obviously 50%, I'm not sure. So they haven't really thought heavily about it, but maybe we'll after listening to you for a while. So it's good they're all here so they can see sort of what are the things that they can start thinking about in preparation. Great. So those are some interesting results. So just to kind of build on that, how did the companies compare across the year? So over a single company over the year, and any interesting from that perspective?
Yeah. So let's look at the other analysis that we did, the vertical analysis. The vertical analysis is we take one company at a time, and we try to figure out, is this company better off than it was in 2007? Is it worse off, and so forth? So the first little bar chart up to the upper left is comparing 2009 to 2007. Now, you would expect companies would be worse off because you're comparing the bottom of the recession to the beginning of the recession. And as you see, the biggest bar on that chart is significantly worse, 30 2% actually. The little table at the bottom tells you the real numbers. But about 32% of the companies actually were worse off. But what was very interesting to me, though, I did not expect too many companies to be in that top area significantly better, but it looked like 19% of the companies were actually in better shape in 2009 than they were in 2007. I mean, overall, the companies were worse, but there was a nice fraction of companies that were in better shape than they were when it started, right?
Right.
And if you go and you compare 2018, which is where we are essentially now, back to 2007, there's a lot of mixed signals. It's hard to tell. 36% of the companies, there were some parts. We had about 8 to 10 metrics. Some of those metrics said they're better. Some of the metrics said they're worse. So we really couldn't determine better or worse. But it looks like the companies that were significantly better has grown to 26% of the companies were significantly better than they were in 2007. You had about 19% of the companies that you can't say there's much change. There were 19% of the companies that also were much worse than they were in 2007. So I would say they're slightly better, but it's not really, obviously, with only 100 companies. I wish I could have done this analysis with 1,000 companies, and then we could say something that was statistically significant. So with only 100 companies, we can sort of see some trends, but we really can't say anything statistically significant. So.
Sure, but some little bit of science there you can speak to what's happening. That's interesting, though, that the the mixed signals for 2018 perhaps was a big variability across the companies in terms of what you were seeing.
Yeah. So what if you look at these graphs, the metrics that we chose were, some got much better. Some would go from yellow to bright green, so they were wonderful. Other metrics would then go from green to bright red, and they got much worse. And you would expect a lot of that kind of chaotic movement. But we were looking at general trends, and the general trend is not real definitive here. Yes, the number of significantly better in 2018 is more than the number of significantly worse, but it's not statistically significant.
Right. Okay, great. So we had that poll. So I'm going to release a poll just based on what you guys have learned so far. If you want to, what do you think are the best indicators of recession readiness? So if you guys have been listening in, just answer in a single word based on a single word or a phrase based on what Bruce has said, and we can talk a little bit about what you guys think are some good indicators there. And then also, now's the time, if you have questions, whether it be on this or on global supply chains in general, to insert them into the question box so that we can ask Bruce once we're wrapping up our review on recession readiness. So make sure to pop those in there. So let's jump in now to the next question. So how did companies compare to each other?
Well, let's look at the companies that suffered versus those that did not suffer in the recession, and then see what they're like today. So we looked at the companies, and we identified a number of groups. The first group were companies that really suffered during the recession, and then how are they today compared to where they were at the beginning of the last recession? So I'm trying to answer the question: did they learn anything? Did they learn any lessons from the last recession? Right.
Sure.
So you might think that, well, if a company got hurt during the last recession, maybe they changed their business practices. What you would like to have happen. They changed their business practices, and now they're in much better shape. And it turns out that, in fact, there are about 9% of the companies that were hurt during the last recession, and now they're in much better shape than they were at the beginning of the last recession. Then there's 4 companies that were hurt during the last recession that are in about the same situation as they were in 2007. And unfortunately, there are group number 3. There's about 10% of the companies that suffered during the last recession, and now they're in even worse situation than they were back in 2007. This whole study, it's interesting. There's a bias I have to tell you about in this study. It's a very obvious bias. we're only looking at companies that actually survived the recession in 2009. Everybody who went out of business was not in the study, right?
Right.
So there's a bit of a bias there already. They're no longer around for me to ask questions anymore, right?
Sure.
And then the companies that did not suffer during the last recession, how many of them are in better shape than they were? And it looks like about 11%. That's the case. And I do have about 6% of companies that did not suffer and are now in worse situations. So the question is, did we learn anything? I'm afraid I have to say that I would consider success in terms of being ready for the next recession if I was to see a nice trend of companies being in better shape than they were, and at least the same or better shape than they were, both in the average metrics, in the horizontal analysis and in the vertical analysis. But I'm not seeing that. I mean, there's a few, but I'm not seeing a big trend towards companies moving into the I'm in better shape than I used to be situation. So I think the problem is that 10 years of the drug of good times, the good times bring on very bad business practices. And after 10 years of that, companies are probably in as bad a shape as they were at the beginning of the last recession, maybe worse shape. I don't know. But I mean, a few companies are better, but I don't see a big trend towards everybody getting better.
Right, right. And I know you've been looking at this for a little bit of time. And do you think it's because there's not a lot of institutional memory in companies, or why are they not so much better off having those that have gone through this, or you think that they would be much more prepared based on companies that survived this in the past?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. First of all, young people join the workforce. They haven't lived through this. So there's a group of people that has not experienced the recession before. And of course, 10 years is a pretty long time. There's a lot of people who have come into the workforce since then, right? And the people who were in the workforce before, 10 years is a long time to remember how bad things were. So as human beings aren't that good at remembering what happened bad in the past and learning the lessons, especially if there's a 10-year lag between when you burn your fingers on the stove and when you're about to reach for the stove again, right?
Sure.
10 years is a long time to remember what it felt like. So, and of course, companies have been under pressure. All the other functions in a company, they have their own idea of what they want to do and how they want to get there. And some of those business practices that they want to do are not so good for a supply chain. And after 10 years of good times, it's hard to keep resisting the pressure to do some untoward business practices.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. Definitely younger, those that haven't experienced it, and other factors there. So we have some results from our poll on what do they think the best indicators of recession readiness. So some say cash reserves, high cash inventory, flexibility, production decreases, unemployment increases, revenue or number of employees a long time, and leverage and revenue, lower cash liquidity, contractors versus permanent employees, and profit. So I think those all kind of came along.
Those all sound good.
Yeah. So you guys are learning today. Thanks. Good job. Great. Okay. So now we'll jump in. So now this will be sort of the last question about the study, and then we'll see what questions we have, and if we have time to talk anything about some other global supply chains topics we have thought about. What do you think, really, now that we've kind of been on this journey to learn about what it means to be recession ready? What are those companies, how they're doing? What do you think really now at this point, knowing that there are companies that are not really prepared and really aren't, maybe highly impacted in this near and current term? What do you think that they can do to prepare for a impending recession?
Well, the answer is pretty simple, actually. And for those of you who couldn't see the slides in the beginning, I'm pulling up a slide that we showed earlier, because in asking what can companies do, a lot of the things that you see in this list is exactly the answer. Okay. Get back to best business practices. Get back to making sure that you have contracts for orders, and those contracts have risk sharing built into the contract, have time fences as to when you take ownership of products with long lead times. In terms of longer sales terms, going back to your original sales terms, don't let them get stretched out very long. Having the discipline, a lot of this has to do with discipline, saying no to the sales force. No, you can't stretch out terms. You've got to stick to the terms because times won't always be good. And similarly with relaxed collections, you know, just look at your own company. What fraction of your accounts receivable are past due? And are you waiting until the due date before you contact the company and say, hey, are you going to pay this invoice? You should be contacting the company, 20 days before the due date and say, is everything okay? The invoice looks good. You're planning to pay it, because many companies, if they find a mistake in an invoice, they're certainly not going to tell you there's a mistake in the invoice until way past due. And then when you call, they'll say, oh, well, we couldn't possibly pay this invoice because there's a mistake on it, right? And so now you've let a month go by, which you could have been proactive and have discovered that, right?
Right.
Just putting good business practices together around what materials the engineers are using in their designs, trying to keep a lid on hiring, keep it lean because you may have to get rid of these people and you don't want to hire people that you have to get rid of. And then purchasing controls. That's an obvious one. It takes so long to get purchasing back under control. Once you've let everybody in the company start buying things, reeling back in that authority, it may take you a year to 2 years. And in the meantime, you're having to let employees go because you don't have enough cash to pay them.
Right. Oh, this is great. Do you think that is there, a certain person in the company that should be sort of a recession health check, have that kind of responsibility, like the CFO or chief supply chain officer, or have you ever heard of something along those lines where they, there's these, there's certain events that are critical that could impact their company? Is there, an evidence of anyone, being aware of that or a health check on any of these things?
Well, as the chief supply chain person in a company, you absolutely have to have the collaboration of the CFO to pull this off, because almost everything on my list here translates back into bad financial results or more risk for the company, right?
Right.
And there are very, different types of companies are driven by different, if it's a company that sells apparel or fashion clothing, those geniuses that are able to design fascinating new models of shoes and dresses and so forth, they're going to run the company, not the supply chain guys, right? And so you need all the friends you can get at the boardroom to help drive good practices, even when you're not in the most powerful position in the company.
Right. Oh, great. Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like you got to have a few individuals from across the company to make that work. Okay, so now we'll ask a few questions. So if you guys have questions, make sure to put them into the question in Slido. If you're not also in Slido, make sure in YouTube to put them in. We can grab them from there as well. I also just released a final poll just for fun and also for our knowledge. What was your favorite lesson of the global supply chains weeks? So whether it was week 7, intro to global supply chains, international transportation basics, currency issues and financing, sourcing and shoring, or global supply chain applications. And I'm seeing it looks like it's gonna be pretty even across all of those. So they're all equally popular. But we'll see what those results were soon. International transportation basics took the lead so far. So a few questions came in, Bruce, on the study. One learner asked, how many companies were polled and what was the error range for the data?
Well, there were 100 companies that were polled, and the error range, I'm not sure what you mean by the error range, but like I said, we're not claiming any statistical significance because we only had 100 companies. And the values for the companies were quite wide. So revenues and profitability. I don't think we had any companies that were unprofitable, but we had companies that were essentially non-profits,
Sure.
and other companies were very profitable. So there was a big range of data here, and that's why if you look at the average performance, there's some meaning that you can get out of that, but also you have to look at each individual company and how many companies did we judge were better than they were or worse than they were back in 2007.
Sure, sure. And then the next question that came through is, why were the big gigantic companies not considered for analysis? And do you think that the big companies are mostly recession proof?
Well, the big companies are absolutely not recession proof. If you look back, I remember back in when the dot-com bubble burst, 2001, some very large telecommunications companies, it's like in the forest, the big trees would fall, opening up the skyline so the sunlight can get down to the forest floor. So there's some very big trees that hit the ground. So the big companies are not recession proof at all. The reason we did not use them in the study was because I was focusing on supply chains, and very large corporations will have financing arms, they'll have insurance companies, they'll have real estate development companies. There'll be a whole mixture of stuff going on, not just supply chain. So I was trying to get, small to medium manufacturing companies so that the financial metrics that we looked at would be a result of what the supply chain was doing, not what the real estate guys were doing.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. And I was just wondering, we talked about a little bit the somewhat implied bias and not having the companies that were killed in the first recession. And I was wondering, what if looking back at what happened to them, what do you think it would tell us if we looked at, why they were kind of so unprepared for the recession? They're just that they were caught off guard. So many of these components, they were in the red.
So the simple answer is they ran out of cash. Because when you run, that's how you go kaput in a recession. There's tremendous pressure on cash. The customers don't want to send you cash. They try to hold back all the orders that they submitted to you and don't send that material. In the meantime, if a company has ordered interesting new materials, cutting edge stuff from suppliers, anything that's being customized, custom made for your company is very risky, because if the bell rings while you have a pending order, you can't cancel the order. You have to take delivery and pay for customized materials that are being built just for you. And so there's all of the things on the list of bad practices that we talked about, but those are some of the ones that the suppliers, the customers are able to cut off your revenue stream very fast. Usually much faster than you can cut off the flow of money out of your company. And you have, the other thing is, think about your employees, often the most valuable thing in your company. You spend a lot of time and energy and money to recruit these excellent employees. And then all of a sudden they're your biggest cost and you're trying to get rid of them, and you don't want to get rid of them because you spent so much time training them. It's a very tough situation. So having the workforce expand faster than your revenues, which has been happening over the last 10 years, is very dangerous. It puts you in a bad position.
Right. Makes sense. So we have another interesting question, which I think is a little bit broad, but I give it to you to see if you can answer it. So Va asks, with innovation getting saturated into everything, how do you think it's going to move supply chain into the future? Just
So
your take on that small question.
I missed the first couple of words. Say that again.
It said, with innovation getting saturated into everything, how do you think that's going to move supply chain into the future?
Well, what's interesting, there's a very interesting connection between innovation and recessions, and I lived through it a couple of times. Right. For example, there was a recession back in 1988, and the IBM personal computer, I think it was 1988, had just come out. And people, when the recession hit, nobody wanted to buy mainframes. Nobody wanted to buy mini computers. Mini computers is kind of a misnomer. It was the size of your refrigerator, right? But people were very willing to buy small personal computers. Actually, it was 1987 is when it crashed. Coming out of that recession, the mini computers were dead. They were gone. That market had completely disappeared. People were buying personal computers. It was smaller, less risky to spend $10,000 than it was to spend $100,000. and the mainframe market had shrunk. There were still mainframes out there, but they weren't as dominant in the marketplace. And so recessions can cause big paradigm changes, and that's one example where one older product line just disappeared coming out of a recession, replaced by an innovative, more efficient, less risky, less costly innovation that came out the other side. So there is a connection there.
Sure. That maybe by being constrained, it forces individuals to be more innovative and think differently in one regard. That's really interesting.
One more thing I might mention on
Yeah,
that is,
please.
if you think about the decision between, I mentioned having a variable cost supply chain is a big advantage when there's a recession, because you have to be flexible and being able to downsize your expenditures, right? So the idea of being a vertically integrated company that owns all of its own assets, it owns the factories, it owns the warehouses, it owns the fleets, it owns the trucks, all the employees work for the company, right? That's a very inflexible model, and recessions have been very cruel to that model. People who lease, rent, use contract manufacturers, have temporary workforce, or at least part of their workforce is a temporary workforce. That's a much better way to survive a recession. If you have a more variable cost structure and you're more flexible, you can downsize very quickly, which is what you need to do so you don't run out of cash before the end of the recession.
Right. Interesting. So a good kind of wrapper up question here came through, and then also we'll discuss the final results of the poll, and then we'll wrap it up. Globalize, appropriately named Globalize learner. What can we do as supply chain professionals to better prepare companies for a recession? Could you name a few of the action items? So I suspect they're asking us that they, as individual supply chain professionals, how can they play a better role here?
Well, supply chain professionals, it's interesting. I highly recommend everybody in supply chain take at least one finance course, if not more than one finance course, so you can understand the implications. The boardroom in your company speaks the language of finance. That's how they make their decisions, based on finance, right? And so a lot of these unfortunate business practices that we talked about can be and should be translated into what's the financial impact of following this approach. And that's one way that you'll be able to get through to the boardroom, to have them understand that some of these business practices that you're under pressure to change are going to have a very bad effect, especially when the recession hits and the cash flow, the stream of cash flow shrinks dramatically. So that's very important. It would, I feel the most pain for companies in the fashion and apparel business, because they're often run by people who are not supply chain professionals. They're creative folks that design interesting new products that people want to buy, and so some of the best practices in supply chain get overlooked because the driving force in the company is not business efficiency; it's style and the glamour and so forth. So
Sure.
Supply chain people need to build those alliances with the CFO and the head of operations and other friends you can find around the table to resist the pressures, to relax the controls.
Sure. Great. Yeah, no, that's good advice. Definitely working across different departments, getting trained in financial language. So, SE2X, we have some supply chain finance terms there, but of course, expanding your knowledge there as well. Great. We have one final question I think we have time for. It's again a little bit broad, but if you have any comments on it. So Abdallah asks, what is the effect of automation on future supply chain management?
Automation. Well, automation, one effect is perhaps you have fewer employees. Employees are hard to get rid of in a recession. And of course, there's an emotional attachment to employees that you don't want to get rid of them if you don't have to, right? So that's good in that regard, that you can you don't have as many employees, and your workforce is more flexible, perhaps. The automation also can cost you a lot of money. And if you're owning the machines, that's a capital expense that you have to worry a little about. Having high fixed costs can be bad. If you're achieving your automation in ways that does not drive up your capital costs, that would be great. What's interesting, what's happening in the United States right now, and probably other developed economies, is that some of the manufacturing production is coming back into places like the United States and Europe. But the blue-collar workers that used to do those jobs, there's fewer of them than there ever were in the past because of automation. Yes, the production went up, but the number of people that are needed to run the line went down. And so that's actually probably has a net good effect on companies' recession readiness overall, I would say.
Great. No, that's really interesting. Thanks for that, Bruce. So this has been a great session. Just as a quick wrap up, as in terms of what were your favorite lesson of Global Supply Chain Week? So the winner, so all equally popular, but your most recent lesson, Global Supply Chain Applications, won with 30% being the most popular lesson. So the case study that was introduced. Also very popular was International Transportation Basics, 20%, 26% of the vote. So glad to hear that you guys liked the lesson and that new edition was a nice add. So that was firstly, apologies to those that you guys that experienced a technical glitch. Bruce had some really nice comments at the very beginning. I'm going to make the YouTube link available at that same website same page that you found the live event. So if you missed the first half, please go and rewatch it there. It was a great session. Sorry for the technical difficulties. And thank you so much, Bruce, for joining us. This is really interesting. I think a lot of students took a lot of great learnings away from it today. We'll make sure to have this YouTube link and then also your 2 supply chain management review pieces available for those that want to read up and get a few more additional details. Thanks so much for your time and have a great afternoon.